Hello and welcome to this week's edition of TRP News. I'm your host, James Andre, and once again, I want to thank you for joining me. This last Thursday, the Senate voted 98-1 to approve legislation giving Congress approval over any nuclear deal with Iran. Senator Boxer was not present, and the only no vote was, guess who? Senator Tom Cotton. Tom Cotton wanted amendments to the bill that many people saw as non-starters. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware said virtually all the amendments that were filed would be controversial, and most of them would sink the bill if adopted. So the legislation was moved forward without the amendments, such as recognizing Israel as Israel's right to exist, and other amendments like that, which really shouldn't be a part of any nuclear weapons deal anyway. The legislation would give Congress 30 days to review a nuclear pact with Iran. During that time, Obama would be able to waive executive branch sanctions against Iran, but would have to leave in place sanctions that were approved and enacted by Congress. If the House and Senate disapprove of the Iran deal, then the president would be forced to leave in place the congressional sanctions, and if there's any other outcome, such as the legislation being stalled, they would allow Obama to go ahead with implementing any nuclear deal. So this legislation is moving forward. It's approved by the Senate 98-1. And apparently it'll have to be approved by the House and signed by the President, who has already said he would agree to sign the legislation as long as it did not have these troublesome amendments attached to it. Tom Cotton, again, a freshman senator who pulled a couple of stunts to try to get the few stunts, by stunts I mean procedural moves, to try to get his amendments added to the bill, even though the Senate Majority Leader, which is his own party, did not know what was happening. Him and Marco Rubio tried to get these amendments added, did not work, did not fly, and so now this legislation is moving forward, as I said, giving Congress 30 days to review any nuclear deal. So that's what's happening on the Iran nuclear deal front. This past week, Thursday, they passed it, and it is moving forward, and it is assumed that it will be passed and signed by the President. Also this past week, the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Mitch McConnell, set a procedural vote for this Tuesday, which is tomorrow as of the publication of this episode, Tuesday, to move forward on fast track. Yes, indeed, I'm talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. So a lot of controversy around this. I've been talking about this, and I'm going to try not again to, as I said, go into too much depth on this, but I just want to keep you updated as to what's happening because it is controversial, although I don't think it should be. 60 votes are needed to limit debate and formally begin work on the bill. So in other words, you need that majority of 60 in order to prevent people from blocking it or trying to do a lot of procedural moves on it. And this is viewed widely as a test vote to see what the level of support is in the Senate. Meanwhile, also announced last week, Harry Reid said that he will block the fast-track measure until Senate first deals with stalled infrastructure bill and a package of reforms to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA. Harry Reid, not seeking re-election for the next term of his Senate seat from Utah. And let me tell you, this guy is a master legislator. I mean, one of the few in the Senate who is really pulling out some moves and getting legislative work done. And he's going to be sorely missed when he retires. But this is a brilliant move on his part. As I said before, this is more likely than not that fast track is going to pass. Republicans want it, a lot of Democrats want it, and Harry Reid has seized the opportunity to move forward some important legislation, and some legislation that is important to a lot of progressives dealing with infrastructure and FISA, which is the surveillance here in the United States. So this is a great move, should be applauded. I think what you're going to see is that all this stuff is going to end up moving forward, and it all should move forward. Also in the past week, President Obama went to Nike headquarters. A lot of anger about this. And I just want to say again and reiterate, progressives, liberals, be careful who you're getting in bed with on this criticism. On one hand, people are saying, he went to Nike, they're the enemies. They're the ones that are shipping jobs overseas, and they are one of the original companies, one of the first to start moving people overseas or moving manufacturing overseas. But when you hear these people criticizing the president and the visit to Nike, and in the next breath they call the president a liar and all sorts of names, realize who you're getting in bed with when you're joining them in this criticism. You're getting in bed with a lot of these right-wingers. You think that all union members are not liberals, okay? When Clinton went up for the presidency, as far as union voting, he was third on the list, okay? These people were not voting for Democrats. There's a significant percentage of Republicans, blue-collar Republicans, who do not support a liberal agenda. They support an agenda that's there to maintain their jobs and maintain the status quo. Well, again, that's reactionary and conservative, okay, because the status quo is something you're never going to get in life and in the world, and especially when it comes to trade, business, and manufacturing. The world changes every day. Your life changes every day. So just keep in mind, when you get in bed with these people who are criticizing the president, criticizing free trade, realize that they're not all liberals. Just because they say union doesn't make them liberal or progressive. Just because they are criticizing free trade does not make them progressive or liberal. In fact, there's a lot of libertarians, a lot of Republicans out there who are against this sort of thing. And let me tell you, a lot of these people are low information people. They don't understand what is happening. They don't realize, and it's really something you have to consider for yourself, okay? So a lot of people were upset. He went to Nike headquarters and gave a speech and an interview in support of his efforts on TPP. And Obama said that critics' arguments are based on fears, or they're fighting NAFTA, the trade deal that was passed 25 or 20 years ago. Okay, and that's what I see as well. People are having a reaction to NAFTA, and a lot of it's not based on fact. Okay, it's just not based on fact. I told you before that this debate over the Trans-Pacific Partnership is a distraction, and economists place the effect of free trade on the jobs, on the job market, on the labor market, as at most 15%. So what that means is that 85% or more of the effect on the labor market of job loss is attributable to other forces besides free trade. Okay, I can't get this through to people enough. This is not, this is a narrative that's been pushed and promoted by a lot of various different people, and this is why it seems to be taken up as fact. It's not just one faction that's promoting it. That's why I tell you, be careful who you get in bed with, who you side with when it comes to these criticisms, okay? Because there's a small faction here, a small faction there, a small faction there, and then it seems that there's a general disagreement about this. What you have is a few loud voices in a lot of different corners, and then you have politicians and leaders who are afraid to stand up and say anything. Who wants to say anything against labor unions when you are dependent upon them to be elected to office? Okay, so this is not exactly how it seems, and just be careful about that, okay? Not saying don't criticize the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm just saying be aware of what you're criticizing, who you're criticizing with, and get the information, okay? Get the facts, because a lot of this criticism, as the president said, is just not true. It's not accurate. It simply is not. So, if you take a look at history, the numbers bear this out, okay, that these free trade deals are not the major factor causing the loss of jobs, all right? And so, you know, many people are talking about these high-paying manufacturing jobs, high-paying manufacturing jobs. I'm going to put up this chart here and take a look at this, okay? The American economy has been transitioning to a service economy since the 1880s. Okay, this is not something that's just happening because of free trade. This is something that's been happening because of growing wealth in this country. As there are more wealthy people, there's a more demand for services. And let's face it, there's only so much goods that can be manufactured. Okay, there's only so much. There's people in other countries that want to manufacture goods too. So if Nike doesn't go put a shoe plant over there in Vietnam, then someone in Vietnam is going to do it, guarantee it, and they are doing it. Someone in China will do it, and they are doing it, okay? So 1880s, we've been transitioning to a service economy. This is before any free trade deal, NAFTA, decades and decades before NAFTA. And many jobs that have disappeared, many of these manufacturing jobs, were only there because of government investment during World War II. Okay, so this is the one thing I haven't gotten into, but people need to realize, you know, a lot of this manufacturing, a lot of these jobs were there because the government forced the manufacturing sector to ramp up production and to expand capacity in order to meet the needs of World War II and the Allies. Okay. The government took control of the manufacturing sector, took control of the labor pool, and financed the expansion of factories. By the end of the war, more than half of all industrial production in the world took place in the United States. So by the end of World War II, the U.S. manufactured more than half of all goods in the entire world. Okay, now if you think that's sustainable, if you think some of those jobs weren't going to go away, then you're just not facing reality, okay? 50% of all goods in the world manufactured in the United States, okay? In Mobile, Alabama became one of the busiest shipping and shipbuilding ports in the nation. In 1940, this is the level of expansion. In 1940, Gulf Shipbuilding had 240 employees. Gulf Shipbuilding, the company. 240 employees, 240. By 1943, it had 11,600. Okay? So exponential expansion from what was originally needed just because of the war. Okay? And Alabama Dry Dock, another company, went from 1,000 workers to almost 30,000. From 1,000 to 30,000 because of government demand and government forcing the expansion of industry, okay, and the subsequent need of these other plants, docks, and all these things. These were all expanded because of this government investment and government demand to meet the needs of production for World War II. A man named Henry Kaiser built a shipyard in California. So a lot of this also was the modernization of the workforce, women entering the workforce, African Americans entering the workforce, child care on the job. A lot of advances were made in order to enhance and make possible this astronomical level of productivity in the country. Okay, so this Henry Kaiser built a shipyard in California, and the government paid for 24-hour child care. It was a state-of-the-art facility with the best nursery school teachers and considered a pioneering test of early education. Okay, workers on every shift, whatever shift they worked, even overnight, could bring their children. But when the war ended, all the centers were shut down. The day after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, all the teachers were laid off. Okay, so this is, you know, right there, boom, the bomb gets dropped and teachers are laid off. This is what happened after World War II. The capacity was not needed. We did not need to provide 50% of the world's manufacturing. Other countries could do it. Think about it. Germany, Russia, a lot of these countries were in the middle of war. England being bombed. How much production could they do? And one of the keys to us being able to produce so much is we were never attacked on the mainland. Okay, so we had a peaceful country, no war, and we had a lot of capacity that could be built up by the government. So when you talk about the loss of manufacturing jobs, a lot of these jobs only existed because the government created them, the government demanded them, the government financed them, and not only that, the government prevented people from moving to different areas and taking different jobs. You were required to work in certain jobs. You couldn't just change jobs during the war. That wasn't allowed. So, people say that war is good for the economy, but it's not war. It's the government investment in industry, labor, and education that is good for the economy. This is why politicians who have sense, like Harry Reid, are saying that we need to prioritize infrastructure investment. And this is why politicians who have sense, like Barack Obama, are saying we need to prioritize education. Okay? So don't get distracted, folks. Don't buy a ticket to the sideshow. Free trade is not the enemy. And on the scale of progressive ideas and the progressive agenda, it just really doesn't register. Okay? This is a narrative that's been built up, and it's not based on the facts. We need to focus our energy on education, infrastructure, and tax policy. We need to unleash the power of government to invest in our well-being and fight the spread of privatization that is only serving to place your tax dollars in fewer and fewer hands. That should be the progressive priority. We aren't fighting free trade is just a sideshow. It's a distraction, and we need to focus on what really matters, what can really make a difference, and that is not arguing against the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement. In another story last week, a young black man scraped together several $1,000s with the help of family and friends in order to make a music video in Hollywood. 22-year-old Joseph Rivers then hopped a train to Los Angeles. When Rivers changed trains in Albuquerque, New Mexico, DEA agents boarded the train and began so-called random questioning of passengers. According to witnesses, Rivers, the only black person in the train car he was in, was also the only one asked to agree to a search of his belongings. So he complied, having nothing to hide, and agents discovered the cash he had with him, seized his money, leaving him with no means to feed or otherwise provide for himself, and despite him putting his mother on the phone to talk to the agents. This is what is called civil asset forfeiture. What this is quote, Rivers' attorney, what this is having your money stolen by a federal agent acting under the color of law. It's a national epidemic. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about this because it is a national epidemic and because often people have no recourse and agents, federal agents, and a lot of states have laws allowing for civil asset forfeiture, and it has nothing to do whether or not you're guilty of a crime or if you committed any crime or associated with any crime. It's merely a suspicion, and it's sort of like a conviction without due process that is allowed under the law. A February report says that the federal program, Civil Asset Forfeiture Program, led to nearly $6.8 billion in seized cash and property from 2008 to 2013. 5 years, cash and property, $6.8 billion. A series in the Washington Post published last year showed that since 2001, $2.5 billion had been seized in cash alone, all from people who had never been charged with a crime and without a warrant issued. $2.5 billion in cash, no crimes, no warrants, all seized by the federal government. While some states are making efforts to scale back their laws, so far there are no changes in the federal rules that allow this practice. Sean Waite, the agent in charge at the DEA's Albuquerque office, said, "We don't have to prove that the person is guilty. It's that the money is presumed to be guilty." The burden of proof lies with those whose property is taken, and they are forced to often wage costly court battles to prove that they came by their possessions legally. So this is an ongoing issue, and there's been more and more outcry about this. Agents, both federal agents and a lot of states, can seize property, seize cash without a warrant, without a crime being charged, on mere suspicion. And in fact, as you see in the case of Joseph Rivers' case, there's not even any suspicion involved, just that you were a young black man with a lot of cash. So this is a big problem, and something that, another issue that progressives should be looking at. This is not legitimate. I don't think it's constitutional, and it shouldn't be happening. Especially if there's no crime, you should not have to go to court to sue the government to get back the property you own that you have a right to, and when you are not shown to be a criminal. And online also this week, I had a few discussions about another favorite hot topic of everyone's, I'm sure, genetically modified organisms, GMOs, also known as. So this is another topic where debate ends up sidetracked by conflicts of personality and ego. And the issue of GMO safety is one of those questions we have that we are blessed with, where the answer, for example, of are GMOs safe is both yes and no at the same time. So you get a lot of adamant people on both sides. No, they're not safe. Yes, they are safe. And the answer is both sides are correct, although neither side is accurate. So GMOs, what I've noticed, and this is what started a lot of the discussions I had online, what I noticed is that there are some who try to falsely characterize GMO critics and ignore their legitimate concerns. There's people who are just painting them as ignorant, as alarmist, classifying them with anti-vaxxers and that sort of thing. And, some of the points I was trying to make online is that, one, any scientist who denies the possibility of unintended consequences, and we see this a lot with GMO supporters, these things are safe, they're safe. Well, there are unintended consequences, and any scientist who says that there aren't is just lying, or lying to themselves or lying to you. So that's one disturbing thing that I see in a lot of GMO supporters. And let me get this straight. GMOs, as far as I know, are organisms that are on the market and that are being consumed now by humans, have, at least in the short term, which in the last few decades, have proven to be safe. Okay, I'm not saying they're not safe. I'm not railing against GMOs. What I'm talking about is this debate and how we have people who are just sort of denying the issues with genetically modified organisms, and whatever side you come down on in terms of consuming GMOs, let's face facts. There are issues, okay? So let's not be egotistical about this. What I see in a lot of these supporters is just this arrogance that they know better than you and you don't know anything. And, you don't have to be a PhD, you don't have to be a geneticist to understand and look at the facts about genetically modified organisms. So there are unintended consequences when it comes to scientific processes, scientific trials, and experiments. That's just a fact. How anyone can try to deny that, I don't know. But there we go to the ego and arrogance thing. And number two, if GMOs are safe, that's great. Okay, they're great. That's great. So why fight labeling? Why don't you want to label them? If they're so great and they're such a great product and Monsanto's trying to sell you soybeans and corn or whatever it is, then why aren't they promoting it? Why aren't you saying, hey, this is that great Monsanto product that we genetically engineered. You should get some. Why fight labeling? Hello. So, they're so safe, they're so great, why fight labeling? And number three, the law lags behind the tech. Okay, allowing ownership of organisms is a problem. Now, someone pointed to me online, a 1930 act allowing ownership of new varieties of plants. Okay, Which, as I said online, is, you first of all, this is 1930 and you're talking about a variety of plants. But, you inadvertently highlighted the issue here, the big problem. So you can just inject a gene, transfer a gene into a plant, call it a new variety, and own it. Okay, so if you don't see the problem with that, then, you are just kind of putting blinders on, because what's to stop you from taking a human, injecting a few genes, and owning that? Or an animal, or some other organism, okay? So these are issues. Now, there are some laws that have come about and some international laws that are beginning to address this, but essentially, it becomes a slippery slope. And if you get a crazy court, a crazy Supreme Court, you get a conservative Roberts Court or something like that, this can go either way. And how are you going to fight this? So, for example, Monsanto, maybe they don't want to own humans, but maybe another company does. And metahumans, or whatever they might be, or human-like organisms. But so say that goes to court because you can't own humans. Well, these other companies who don't have these human-like organisms are going to want to fight it as well, because if you say you can't own that organism, that could have a chain reaction, a legal chain reaction, going down to you can't own a particular plant just through genetic modification. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm not trying to be alarmist. I'm just saying it's an issue, okay? It's a concern. And to ignore it is just, as I said, putting blinders on. Let's not be silly. Ownership of organisms is a concern. It's an issue. It's something that we fought a civil war over, ownership of human beings. Also, engineering plants to allow the increased limitation of biodiversity is a problem. So, allowing these, the introduction of these proprietary plant products where you can just spray this glyphosate, this Roundup, on fields and kill all these weeds, you're actually reducing, yes, you're reducing the pest population, but you are also reducing the biodiversity in that field. And you have a monoculture field, which is actually, okay, there's a study done out of Kellogg in Michigan that shows that when you actually do this, what you're doing is increasing pest pressure. You're actually, when you suppress all these pests, plant and insect, and create this huge monocultural field, you are actually increasing the pest problem, because you've created a food source. You end up having organisms that adapt to your treatment, to your herbicide and pesticide treatment, and then the areas that are not treated end up causing a breeding effect where these animals converge on this monoculture, and you end up with more pest pressure than when you started. Okay? So there's actually a study that shows that you should leave a lot of these areas. You should not treat so much of these areas, which is really what another issue with what is happening in terms of the use of herbicides and these genetically modified organisms that allow herbicide to be used and not affect the commercial plant product. Okay, so there seem to be so many fallacies from supporters of GMOs. They say that genetic engineering is the same as natural genetic modification, ignoring the fact that levels of consumption of naturally evolved organisms takes place, the rise in levels of consumption takes place over millennia, while commercially modified products become widespread in less than a decade. So, soy went from the adoption from soy, the GMO soy has only been around for, 20 years or so. And now suddenly it's 80% of the soy production in the United States. Or excuse me, it's more than that. It's like 90% of the soy production. So when you're talking about, these plants are genetically modified by nature, that's not the same thing. Over millennia, the human population adapted and evolved with those plants. Here you have a company that modifies a plant and puts it in the consumer market and has the money to market and promote it. A sweet potato is modified by bacteria in the soil, but and over thousands of years changed. But here we have Monsanto who can have people adopt GMO soy in a matter of decades. Suddenly it's the only soy you can get. So GMO supporters say there are no known health problems associated with GMOs, while ignoring the fact that there are industry practices in place when it comes to the modification of organisms that are designed to avoid negative health consequences and negative reactions to products. So they have things in place like don't use known allergens or genes from known allergens in a commercial product. So if there's no known issues because there's a potential for issues that is recognized and there's an effort to avoid it. So who's to say that there's not some issue that is unrecognized that may become evident later? Now, and again, I'm not trying to be alarmist. I'm not saying that it will happen. What I'm saying is let's recognize this as a fact. There can be adverse reactions to genetic modifications. Now, we have a lot of knowledge, and we avoid those reactions, and so far have been successful, but that doesn't mean it's not a possibility. Let's just admit the truth. They point to reduced levels of toxicity of herbicides, like Roundup, while ignoring the increase of herbicide-resistant weeds requiring an increased use of glyphosate and other more toxic herbicides when glyphosate becomes ineffective. So it's been shown, you get a field of GMO soy and you put it in place and you just need a little bit of Roundup, a little bit of glyphosate, and suddenly you can get all this great production and no competition from weeds. Well, what happens is, 5 years later, the weeds become resistant to glyphosate, and suddenly, guess what farmers do? They have to turn to more toxic herbicides in order to control those weeds. And that's what happens. First there's an increase in use of glyphosate. And then as the weeds become more and more resistant, the farmers turn back to more toxic brands of herbicide. So let's not ignore this. This is part of the facts of what's happening when it comes to GMOs. Herbicide tolerance happens. Weeds evolve. Insects evolve. So this is an issue, and again, it goes back to biodiversity, and this whole monoculture thing, has to be managed in the right way. Okay, this is not an issue of GMOs are bad, GMOs are the devil. This is an issue of GMOs are not the final answer, and there are issues with GMOs, point blank. Let's not lie about it. Let's not call people dumb for having questions about it. Let's not be arrogant and act like there are stupid alarmists. Let's just admit the facts and let's address them. Genetic engineering is going to happen. It's already happening. But this is another issue where no one is served by adamant and ideological, unreasoned positions. So let's take an objective look at the facts and let's consider the consequences for the future. And in this last week also it has been reported that a high school in Dallas County, Texas is experiencing an outbreak of chlamydia, which is an STD, sexually transmitted disease. So Texas state law requires abstinence to be the main focus of any sexual health courses, and that students must be taught abstinence until marriage is the best prevention for STDs. That's Texas state law. Well, Crane High School in Texas, in Dallas County, Texas, does not offer curriculum in human sexuality, although they do offer a 3 days sexual education once a year at the beginning of the year. So there have been 20 cases of chlamydia reported in this high school out of 300 students. 20 cases out of 300 students. And Dallas County HHS, Health and Human Services, reports that there's been about a 50% increase from 2005 to 2013, which is 2013 is the last year statistics are available. There has been a 50% increase in the reports of STDs, chlamydia. So from 2012 to 2013, this is the Health and Human Services Agency reporting this, syphilis diagnoses increased by 31%. So we go from an HIV outbreak in Indiana and to an outbreak of STDs in Texas. And the evidence is in, folks. A moralistic approach to public policy is not only ineffective, but it is dangerous. So let's start using some logic. You may be religious, you may be a highly moral person, and I won't question you, but I will question the efficacy of your morals-based policies. Needle exchanges work, sex education works, Planned Parenthood works, passing out condoms works, talking to people about sex and the dangers of sexual intercourse works, and taking the moral high ground and just trying to bury our heads in the sand is just not effective, and it's not a safe practice. So that does it for this week. TRP News, I'm James Andre. I hope you enjoyed this week's edition, and thank you once again for joining me. I'll see you again next week.